It's been a spectacular meeting, lots of new friends made, lots of fabulous presentations and new information. But I want to ask you to cast your mind back to the first official day of the meeting on Tuesday, and the opening ceremony, when Eileen Hoffman congratulated and thanked the various people who helped put together this conference. But she left out one very important person, and that's Eileen Hoffman. And so this meeting doesn't happen. Those of us that have been on the organizing committee know very much how much work she has put into this, and that it would not have happened without her. And I would invite you to show our appreciation to Eileen with a big round of applause. And Eileen is true when she says that for many of us that have been doing this a long time, our careers have been defined by JGOS or GLOBEC, some of these large open environmental global programs. So for the early career scientists, we really do encourage you to get involved, to stay involved, because for many of you, it will indeed make your career, and it makes a fabulous career as well. And maybe sometime in the future, I hope that we will be congratulating some of you early career scientists for putting on a conference like this. So I've got 3 announcements to make before we begin. The first of those is a reminder of the Ocean Governance Survey. Forms are in the back. Please do fill them out. Although you might not think that you're involved in governance, you all are in one way or another, so please do fill them out. The second announcement is for those of you that attended and participated in the Publication and Scientific Writing Workshop, which took place on Sunday, convened by Eileen and Wolfgang Fennel and Luane Bandunas from Elsevier. There are certificates of attendance if you wish to get one, and please see Lisa if you'd like to obtain a certificate of attendance for that workshop. Third announcement is the coffee break. The early career scientists, students and early scientists are invited to go to room K3. The idea here is that we're going to put a little bit of time at the end of the program for early career scientists to provide some thoughts and comments. Again, it loops back to this is your meeting when your career really starts. And so in order to do that, you're invited to go into K3 and sort of develop some consensus thoughts and consensus comments for the presentation at the end of the conference this morning. I forgot to tell you who I am. My name is Ian Perry. I'm with Fisheries and Oceans Canada in Nanaimo in British Columbia. I'm a member of the Scientific Organizing Committee for this meeting and a member of the Human Dimensions Working Group as well. So just a preview of what's going to happen this morning. We're obviously in the plenary now. The plenary will run through till 10:15 or so, at which time we will have a coffee break. The coffee break will end at 10:45, when we will go back into our simultaneous and concurrent sessions. So those sessions will complete the kind of contributed part of the meeting and roll through till about noonish or so. When those sessions are over, that's not the end of the meeting, so please don't disappear. There'll be a short break while this room is reconstructed into the open theater that we see now. And then we'll have the closing ceremonies. And the closing ceremonies will consist, as I mentioned, of some comments from early career scientists. And then Dr. Eugene Murphy will provide an overview of the conference from the kind of, let's call it, quote unquote, the established scientific perspective. So Eugene has been going around to all of the meetings and he'll provide some thoughts and some overview comments. And then we'll finish up with some awards and some presentations. So we should be ending around 1-ish, after which lunch will be served, and then you're on your own to enjoy the beautiful sunny weather and in sunny Bergen. Or perhaps to have side meetings where you can develop your next set of proposals or your next set of scientific projects. So this morning in the plenary, we have 2 outstanding speakers who will give 2 outstanding presentations. The first presentation is by Claudio Campagna and Dan Costa. Dr. Claudio Campagna works for the Wildlife Conservation Society in Patagonia in Argentina. He was a researcher with the National Research Council of Argentina, and he's currently a member of the steering committee of the IUCN Species Survival Commission and of the Antarctic Southern Ocean Coalition. He's held a Pew Fellowship, and he helped to create and coordinate the Patagonian Coastal Zone Management Plan, which was the first global environmental facility-funded project in Argentina. His research is animal behavior and the biology of marine mammals, and he's been promoting an ecosystem approach to the conservation of the Patagonian oceanscape. The title of Dr. Campagna's presentation is Species and Spaces in the Ocean, from Sustainability to Conservation. Dr. Campagna. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for being here. I've been in the dinner last night. I understand that it was probably more interesting to stay a little bit longer there and perhaps sleep a little bit today. So those of you that had the courage to come earlier, we thank you very, very, very much. We also thank you, the organizers. This is an opportunity really to address conservation issues to this particular audience. We were very much affected yesterday by the tiramisu effect. So we hope that by the end of this presentation, we are not getting the tiramisu delivery in that particular way. If today we had to choose about the title of this talk, we would have changed it to What About the Seas, What About Us? Remember that title. I will go back to it and let you know the source of that idea in a little bit in the future of this talk. In this talk, we are going to refer mostly to species. Both Dan and I are species-oriented people. We work in the field with species, mostly with marine mammals. So we have species in mind when we talk the ocean. We will also talk about the species in a very spectacular context, very, very particular one, which is the crisis of biodiversity. We define the crisis of biodiversity as the sum of threats to extinction of species. And we will suggest to reflect about the scientific information available about the crisis of species, but in the context of values. We have been discussing a lot about perspectives and the directions of science during the last few days. Today, we are going to propose to reflect about the relevance of science in the context of the crisis of species. We believe that the crisis of species, this is what we do. We talk with species, and these are the different threats of species that lead to the crisis of species. We believe that the crisis of species is certainly one of the most spectacular and important issues that we have to face as scientists and as humans today. We believe that this crisis has to be framed in the context of value issues, because in the context of crisis, humans that are informed, but in addition that decide in the context of values, are expected to do better than humans that just decide in the concept of information or in the concept even of knowledge. Humans are value-driven, and decisions that are not being informed by values may be risky. This particular perspective of values and humanity are being challenged, are being questioned by what is called conservation in the era of the Anthropocene. Conservation in the era of the Anthropocene is more about information. What some people are saying is that conservation science today has one function, and that is to inform development. We are going to challenge that perspective. We do not believe that that's the case. We believe that the most important movements that change the future of humanity have been value movements. We can cite the slavery, for example, movement, that, or the equality of gender examples. We could think about sustainable development of slavery. It is possible, but it does not make any sense if your mind is clear, you cannot really put that issue in the context of information and make slavery more sustainable. You just don't approve it, don't accept it. So we treat those issues within a conceptual framework. We are not putting conservation of biodiversity and the crisis of biodiversity, we're not equating those issues with those kind of movements. We believe we should. We are going also to challenge or to make a few other additional points that could be a little bit unexpected. The first is that the crisis of species is by far the central global issue that we face, both as scientists and as humans. Then we are going to suggest that in the present value system, the species crisis does not have a solution. We will go on and we will still have the crisis. As a result, in the present value system, it is not even a good idea to align the priorities of science with those of species conservation. Finally, we dare to challenge one huge paradigm. This is a sentence from the launching of Resilient People, Resilient Planet, the Future Worth Choosing by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in the UN in 2012. He said, sustainable development offers our best chance to change course. Sustainable development is a social, economic, and environmental imperative. We dare questioning that statement. Okay, we will suggest that the paradigm that was created around the concept of sustainable development is depriving us from the essential values frameworks to stop the crisis of biodiversity. Under the sustainable development paradigm, we became or will become instruments of assessment, at the most of restoration, and soon of de-extinction. Enough about this introduction. Earth Song was a theme that Michael Jackson rehearsed for the last time, just after midnight, on June 25th, 2009. That day, Michael Jackson died. That means that Earth Song was the last song that he sang and the last song that he rehearsed. The theme of Earth Song is the best sold single in Jackson history. If you search about this theme in YouTube, you will find that this particular YouTube of many versions of Earth Song in YouTube has been seen by 39,700,000 people. And when we started to prepare this talk about a week ago, this was 500,000 people less. So, considering the countless broadcasts of Earth Song in TVs, in radios, even in airplane entertainment systems, it is possible that hundreds of millions of people have been exposed to the messages of Earth Song. Probably more. And 1 billion people? Why not? I mean, it's not impossible. This is about 20 orders of magnitude higher than my best read paper. I can guarantee you that. The relevance of Earth Song, as I said, is about the message that Michael Jackson is trying to give us. He asks, what have we done to the world? Look what we've done. This is one of the lines that he says. And then he goes on with many lines that are interposed with the question, what about us? So he goes, for example, what about nature's world? What about us? What about animals? Have we lost their trust? What about the seas? What about us? Ravaging the seas. What about us? What about us? We believe that we all agree is a pertinent question in future oceans. We might have expressed the same question in different words, in a different language, but we can see a convergence in this kind of question, and what we have been discussing here. The final line of Earth Song is to us quite relevant, because Michael Jackson says, what about apathy? Do we give a damn? And that's more or less the lyrics in a nutshell of Earth Song. We're going to use Earth Song as a backbone of this presentation for what you will be seeing soon. So the first thing that we're going to ask is, what have we done to the world? And we're going to review what we have done to the world. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, puts together what's called the Red List of Threatened Species. This is being done once per year. IUCN is the world's most authoritative source of information on the conservation status of species that you can have. This is a result of scientific work. This is not advocacy. There are about 7,000 people in the Species Wildlife Commission that help putting together the Red List for many, many thousands of animals. 2014 is a year of celebration because the Red List is turning 50 years old. Today we know the status of conservation of 73,686 species. And I'm very happy to announce that 22,000, more than 22,000 of them are threatened. Threatened is a category that puts together critically endangered, endangered, and vulnerable species, three categories of IUCN. In a nutshell, threatening means that the populations globally are going down. This is what you have to think when you're thinking about the threatened species. This graph is showing you what's called the distribution of the Red List Index. When you have a Red List Index that is 1, that means that all of the species are least concerned. No problem, they're doing fine globally. When you go to 0, that means that they are extinct. As you can see, none of these species are either extinct or least concerned. But the interesting thing is that amphibians are today the most threatened group of animal species in the planet. We also know that corals are moving towards increased extinction rates more rapidly than any other animal group assessed. If we look at the charismatic megafauna that is so important for conservation, the top predators, a recent paper by Lascelles et al. That is still in press shows that 174 migratory marine species are threatened. These include all the marine turtles, the cartilaginous and the bone-fishes, the marine mammals, and the seabirds. Those are what are called migratory marine species. They are species that cross boundaries. They cross all the law of the seas boundaries that you could imagine: economic exclusive zone, international oceans, etc. Some of these species, what does it mean? Well, for example, turtles. There are 7 species. 6 of them are endangered. Some of them critically endangered. And the only one that is not is because we don't have information to categorize it. For some shark species, we today have 90% less abundance than a few years ago. This is being supported by research, certainly, what I'm telling you. For 350 seabird species that were categorized, which is basically all what has been described. Sorry, from all the species of seabirds that have been categorized, 350 are threatened. So that means, as I said, that globally their populations are decreasing. Up to today, IUCN recorded 721 extinct species. 721, and 31, I think 31, are extinct in the wild. That's the category. They exist in botanical gardens or in zoos. In addition to that, we have many thousand species, more than 4,000 critically endangered, which means they may not make it. In a few years, they may go extinct. As Dan said yesterday, the ocean has been quite shielded from extinct species. We don't have many extinct species in the ocean yet. That's a source of good hope. But species go extinct, and this is extinct mostly due to human sources. This is not the same thing as natural selection, evolution that we understand. If you want to really have an idea of this, I mean, everybody probably has seen or heard about the movie Finding Nemo. Okay, there has been a paper. They looked at all the different groups of animals of Finding Nemo, and they decided that they realized that the total number of species that belong to those groups is a little bit more than 1,500. It's 1,568. So the groups that you see there are represented today by more than 1,500 animals. 2 out of 10 of those animals are threatened with extinction. Finding Nemo is about the threats of species. Another movie, Happy Feet, is about the causes of that threat. In Happy Feet, the hero of Happy Feet has a plastic ring around the neck. He's entangled. He's an entangled animal. And he's lucky because he made it. But IUCN estimates that 700,000 birds per year die due to entanglement, due to accidental catch and entanglement. You have to add that to 250,000 marine turtles per year that die in gill nets or that die in long lines. And to that you have to add 500,000, 500,000 marine mammals, all accidental catch in fisheries per year. These numbers, as I said, is not the work of activists. This is publications, scientific publications in good peer-reviewed scientific journals. IUCN is a source of that information. Do we need more data? I could go on, we could go on the entire day. I could really, literally go on a couple of hours with information on the status of the world. I don't think that we need more data to convince you that we are in a crisis of biodiversity. What I would like to do, what we would like to do, is to ask the question, what are we doing to repair that crisis? Let me show you this. This is a distribution of 6 charismatic megafauna species that are the result of a research of the tagging of Pacific predators, which is a field research, field project of the Census of Marine Life. What we know is that all these pelagic species are distributed over millions of square kilometers of ocean. Millions of square kilometers. They move across all physical and legal barriers that you could imagine that exist in the ocean. We know also that many of these species are threatened, and we know how to protect them. We know, for example, that marine protected areas are an important tool for some of these species. Despite the fact that they are distributed like that, they concentrate their activity in some areas of the ocean. So marine protected areas are useful tools to protect pelagic predators. It's not just us, it's not me saying that. Governments do accept that that is the case. Governments got together in Japan in 2012 and 2010, sorry, and they came together, they signed what's called the Aichi targets. And Aichi target 11 says by 2020, at least 17% of terrestrial and inland waters and 10% of coastal and marine areas are conserved through ecologically representative and well-connected systems of protected areas. This is what the government signed for. This is binding. It's Convention of Biological Diversity. The best map available on marine protected areas is this. What you see is in dark blue, these are the protected areas of the world. This map integrates about 4,500 protected areas. Altogether, they do not sum more than 2.8% of the ocean surface. If you are considering no take, this goes beyond the 1%. This is a joke. If this is what we believe that we are doing for the protection of the charismatic megafauna, I mean, and it is just a small group of species, this is a joke. This is not enough. Everybody knows that it's not enough. And it's very likely that by 2012 we will not reach 10%. That number has already been postponed once. Okay, and this is happening against all kind of information showing that marine protected areas work. Marine protected areas work for employment, work for revenue, work for resilience against global change. Marine protected areas work for conservation. We know that fish are larger and more abundant within marine protected areas. Sharks, for example, appear within marine protected areas, but they do not exist outside. We know that marine protected areas are not also useful tools for conservation, they are also useful tools for management, and certainly no-take marine protected areas are the most effective. Much progress has been made already. We have to admit that in order to reach 2.8%, a lot of work was done, but it's not enough. As you could see here, just for a few individuals, what we need is a different concept about marine protected areas. We need large marine protected areas. We need movable. We have to think that marine protected areas in the ocean cannot be like national parks on land. They may have to move seasonally. This is a concept that today is naive to even express. Well, this is exactly what we believe we need. And we know that we need transboundary marine protected areas. All these are very difficult concepts to apply to achieve in reality, but this is exactly what we need. If we are going to be serious about attempting to protect some of the species that are threatened today, we have to be serious about what we have to achieve in terms of protected areas. And large marine protected areas are essential in prime habitats. And here we are talking the deep sea, the high seas, and especially Antarctica. We believe that the Ross Sea, the East Antarctica, the Antarctic Peninsula, the Weddell Sea are places relatively sheltered from the large fisheries that have been damaging the rest of the world, the rest of the ocean. So we believe that these particular places are prime habitat that require particular attention. The fate of some of these areas, like the Ross Sea, lies within the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, or CAMLR. Within CAMLR, nature is worth as resources. And here's where we start entering in the value discussion. Calling species resources, we believe, places them in a system of values that prevents empathizing with animals. The political and institutional structures that should have prevented the crisis of biodiversity not only failed doing that, but paradoxically install the idea that what is the proper values of system to frame nature is the value of nature seen as resources. We will illustrate the point of this paradigm by giving you some examples about language. First of all, we'll concentrate on the concept of sustainable development, and we will go back to the Resilient People, Resilient Planet launching of Ban Ki-moon in 2012. He said, and this is important, the world is experiencing unprecedented prosperity, the UN, while the planet is under unprecedented stress. And then he goes on and says the human appetite for resources keeps growing. Sustainable development offers our best chance, etc., etc., etc. Take into account the first sentence. The world is experiencing unprecedented prosperity while the planet is under unprecedented stress. What is about sustainable development that can solve that problem, that can solve all maladies? The concept started in 1987 with Our Common Future, the Brundtland Report. Sustainable development became since then embedded in the fabric of every environmental policy that you could imagine at the local level, regional level, international level, global level. Yet, despite the fact that the concept has been with us 25 years, the UN, which is the origin of that concept, has to admit that the world is experiencing unprecedented prosperity, but the planet is under unprecedented stress. Why? What happened that sustainable development has not solved the problems of the world in 25 years? The world changed many times during that time. Technologically, it's another world. We're going to tell you a little bit of what happens studying language. These are the most important environmental summits in 40 years. 72 Stockholm, 92 Rio, 2002 Johannesburg, Rio plus 20. Look at the titles of these conferences, the names. This was the UN Conference on Human Environment. This was the UN Conference on the Environment and Development. Then this was the Sustainable Development Conference. The word environment has been dropped. Does not exist anymore. I mean, we don't have to be naive here. The UN Conference have political, institutional, and financial consequences. Building agreements and signing them is one of these consequences. And these agreements are related to funding. If you don't use the language of those agreements, you don't get the funding. Let me show you a little bit more information about this. These are the declarations of each of these agreements. They have 2,000 words, 1,500 words, 25,000 words. We counted the number of times that these words, environment development, on all these ones, appeared in the declaration. So in this one, 100 times, 81 times, 700, X number of times. The environment in 72 was much more important than the concept of development. It went all the way around. And the words like conservation, wildlife, biodiversity, nature, they're basically disappearing from the way that we express our priorities, environmental priorities. In 1972, it was okay to say the loss of species removes from our creatures of beauty and parts of our cultural heritage. It diminishes the biosphere. It was okay to use the word beauty. Today, it's politically incorrect to use that word in these kind of agreements. It does not appear anymore. Okay. What this example illustrates is that the structure of language reflects the value structure. That's one of the messages that we have for all of us today. And I will have to go faster now. I will perhaps just say that sustainable development is a concept that today makes no difference because it builds ambiguity while avoiding commitment. It works as a disclaimer that says that the environment will be eventually taken into consideration after it serves all kinds of needs. Those of the poor and the rich, the north and the south, the left and the right, the overpopulated and the overconsumers. And I'm going to go to the last part of this talk. What about apathy? Do we give it down? Science is part of the structure of values that I have been showing to you. As a result, sustainable development is placing science in the position of basically informing strategic extinction, not conservation. This is what it has been said in our common future. I will just read the first one. Every nation has only limited resources at its disposal, dealing with conservation priorities. Explicit efforts to save particular species will be possible for only relatively few of the more spectacular or important ones. We are already saying, yes, no. This is 87, sorry. So this has been said before. In the same speech that we've been going back again and again, Ban Ki-moon says, we are not passive, hopeless victims of the impersonal determined forces of history. We have a chance. This does not have to be like that. Then the question is, what is the role of this community? So we change that. What is the role of the community that speaks for 70% of the ocean surface? Here, I think that we have to consider that we have not been in apathy. We are very, very active, actually. Many of us do share the 20% time devoted to informing policy. We even share 200% of our time devoted to policy. So we have been active, but we have not been effective. And here I'm citing a short note published in Nature called Be Persuasive, Be Arrested. And this is what the author says. Overstatement may generally be dangerous in science. It certainly is for careers. But for climate change and uniquely, understatement is even riskier and therefore arguably unethical. And he says, it is crucial that scientists take more career risks and sound a more realistic, more desperate note on the global warming problem. I say that what he said about global warming could be said about the crisis of species. I do agree that this is what we need. And this is because our clamor is not being heard, because it's a whisper. We whisper. We are not really trying to call the attention of people. And this is partially because we are very scared, very worried about being anti-something. And we do not understand of the consequence of being anti-nothing. We need to think about the consequences of not getting involved in these kind of issues. Here is a vision. Here is a vision. And I will try to do it in 2 minutes, a vision. There is a place for science, for politics, and for policy. There are some people that are just good for science. Fine, fair enough. We need these people. We need them. I have been part of that. But we also need people that translate science. So science makes sense, has some relevance. We suggest that those people that translate science have to be scientists too. We don't need to be translated by people that do not understand how science is being done or what science means. We have to be those translators. So that's one of the things that we have to tell you. We suggest that in order to be good translators, we need to arrive to two agreements. The first is where we are, and the second is where we want to be. Where we are is an issue about science, because science has information to provide us and to tell us where we are. We have to agree about where we are, and we do agree about where we are on many different things. Where we are going to be, where we want to be, that's not a scientific question. That's a value issue. But science can inform that value issue. And the translators can work on that value issue. So we're going to make the point that we need to work on those on all different fronts. We need to work on the front of sustainable development. Certainly we do. And we need to provide information all the time. But at the same time, we need another group of people that are thinking more about the philosophical aspects, that are trying to keep alive the intrinsic values of nature. Both are necessary, but the second are more. Because the second today are the ones that are being arrested, are the ones that are not getting the money, are the ones that are not being heard, because they are not being seen as practical. So this is something that we want to really convey to you. And finally, I want to live with these generalities. I think we need to be more aware of language and concepts. Be more critical. Think the language that you use when you speak. We have to make sure that nature is not just considered natural resources. Let's make sure that we think about that every time that we are doing this. And sometimes that sustainable development is concealed in overexploitation. We need to make sure that we understand the language, because it's language what makes humans humans. It's language that moves our ideas and builds our values. If we don't speak the proper language, we should not be, this is not a semantic issue. This is the point I want to make. It's much more than that. The second thing is, observe how the crisis of biodiversity is easily overridden by human development issues. Today, poverty issues are recorded against nature. It's not about greed, it's not about wasting resources. Some say 30 million tons of food as bycatch. No, it's not about that. It's nature. Nature has to support poverty issues. And I deleted this sentence, but I'm going to say it now. I know what poverty means. I come from a country where I see poverty. And in my own case, I come from a family that had lots of trouble. So I certainly feel that I'm empowered to talk about these issues. And I can guarantee you that if we lose the concept of intrinsic values, if we lose the concept of beauty that poor do have, we are going to really lose the battle against poverty. Finally, be critical about the request of being practical and pragmatic. Oh, well, this is not practical. How are you going to change the values? Think. We change the values many times. Many times. The word change many times. Be aware that what some call advocacy is sometimes concern. It is very easy to say, advocacy, an activist. It's not true. It's just concern. And as a take-home message for us, I believe that the proportion of the knowledge to really quantify the crisis of species, to talk about the crisis of species, is in the hands of the NGOs, is in the hands of the non-government organizations. We should not be scared about non-government organizations. I moved from a government scientific position to a non-government organization position. And I believe that my organization is quite strong in the science. So I believe that NGOs should be brought closer to the academic world. And both Dan and I want to thank you all, and we thank my wife that put together this presentation for us, and she says that that's a way of thanking in Norwegian. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Campagna. We have time for a couple of questions. Yes, Silvia Marasti.
Marcy. I'm from Barcelona, so I'm from a full country also. So I can speak. And I would like to, we will finish with the languages and with the use of language. And I would say we have also to be very careful using the facts. Yeah. And because we are here, we all know about this research. We all agree with you. But we are spending today much more energy than we used to spend 30 years ago. And we are not happier, and we are not more witty, and we are not more healthy. So even we, that we have all this knowledge, we are not doing well. And I try to teach my children with this message that we are using entrepreneurship, we are throwing away food, we are blah, 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 blah. Do you know what my daughter told me when I came here? Mom, if you're so concerned about this, why you are flying there? I'm not doing an internal connection, virtual connection, no? I have to say. So we, in the message you are giving, and sometimes I'm not complaining about the message, I also do this message, but we have to be careful that we individually, we are not doing well.
Absolutely.
We. And you when you give this message,
but let me tell you.
We are not fair, because we are not doing.
I agree with you completely. Let me tell you that it did not escape me, what you're saying. I thought about it. The only reason why I'm here is because I have been invited to address you, and I consider that this is actually a very positive opportunity to convey a message that otherwise it would not have been conveyed in a different way. But I thought about it, and I'm also not happy about many of the things that we do as individuals. We try to compensate. I don't know if we're doing it well.
No, the thing was, I was going to say, is all of us think that the politicians will do it, the neighbors will do it. But we are not.
Yeah, no. But it's part of what you are saying. It's part of being consistent. Yeah, and it's part of not allowing that to happen.
Another question?
There is one.
I'll take one in the back. I can't see who that is. Marianne Glaser.
Thank you for your inspiring talk. I just wanted to pick up the juxtaposition of environment and development. I don't think it quite hits the point. It's environment and sustainable development. And sustainable development contains a strong element of embeddedness in a sustainable environment. And that same juxtaposition comes through, it's in danger of coming through when you talk about fully protected, effective NPAs. There is a huge, and I mean huge, grey zone of illegality and inability to effectively protect NPAs, and that's particularly strong where poverty is particularly strong. On the other hand, there's also quite a lot of positive indicators, quite a lot of positive development in terms of where people benefit, poor people benefit from protecting species, from actually working with nature. I was part of the first community-managed national park, and that's still working 10, 12 years later, and it's that way we have to go. It's really not, I think, helpful to juxtapose the fight against poverty with the fight against, with the sort of fight for species survival. It needs to be together, and fully protected, effective NPAs, where you say, oh, poverty mustn't overtake species, the importance of species will lead to more conflict and more illegality.
I agree with you. What I don't think is that it's that what is happening. I agree that what you're talking is about correct principles. I don't think that those correct principles is what the world is showing. I agree that originally sustainable development was meant to be what you're saying, was meant to be economic sustainability, social sustainability, and ecological sustainability, but with time, it's just development as usual. It's just development. The word sustainable just dropped, and all the information that I'm showing to you is a result of development, but not the result of sustainability. And the concept has been with us a quarter of a century. What are we expecting to challenge it? It's not working. Originally it was. I do believe that the Brundtland report and the Brundtland Commission was truly honest in terms of trying to come up with a solution. I do. I read it. I'm not happy with all what it says, as you can see, but they did have the value system still embedded in what they were doing. That disappeared. That's my suggestion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Campagna. Well, they get changed their clothes up here. I will introduce our next speaker. So our next speaker and our final speaker of the plenary session for this conference is Dr. Alistair Hobday. Dr. Hobday is a senior research scientist at CSIRO in Hobart in Australia. His research includes spatial management and migration of large pelagic species, assessing the impacts of climate change on marine resources, and developing adaptation options. He leads CSIRO's Marine Climate Impacts and Adaptation Area. He co-led the development of risk assessment methods for assessing the ecological sustainability of Australia's fisheries, which is a process that is now used around the world, including by the Marine Stewardship Council. Dr. Hobday was also a contributor to the 4th and the 5th IPCC assessments. Within IMBeR, he is the co-chair of the CLIOTOP committee. And the title for Dr. Hobday's presentation is Climate Change Impacts and Options for High Trophic Level Marine Species. Alistair Hobday.
Thanks very much to Ian and Eileen, and very much to the organising committee for the invitation to talk at the meeting. And Eileen, I hope that you'll have a chance to share some Vegemite with that group as a thank you very much. I'd also like to thank very much the members of the CLIOTOP community, my co-chairs, the chairs, the people on the steering committee, and also working group chairs and the whole community for the support that they provide the kind of research that I'm going to talk about. You know, like many of you, when you travel to a meeting, you leave your family behind, and I definitely appreciate the support of my family in being able to pursue this kind of research area. And you know, thinking about family matters a lot because they're the ones, in the case of our children and our grandchildren, they're the ones who are going to experience the world that we leave behind. And I live in a place in the world that is experiencing really rapid climate change. This is an analysis that shows the rate of surface temperature warming in the ocean over the past 50 years. And in Southeast Australia, circled there, we're seeing really dramatic evidence of climate change already. And that's meant that the community has become very aware of that, and we don't suffer the same contrarian kind of views that you see in other parts of the world. The signal of warming in Southeast Australia is really strong. And we've seen that right through the food web. And this is just a list of studies that have shown the evidence in intertidal species, in sea urchins, in rock lobster, in coastal fish species, in seaweeds. And these are observed changes that have already happened. So in this area of the world and those other hotspots, climate change is already happening. So the idea that we need to prepare society for something that's coming in 50 or 100 years is not the reality in many places. If you view that kind of stuff in the sense of a food web, this is a food web for that region in Southeast Australia, and everywhere I've circled is where a study has shown that there's an observed impact of climate change already in the ocean. Right through the food web and all the way up to the top predators. And it's those top predators that have been the focus of the CLIOTOP program that I'll report some of the findings of now. And CLIOTOP started on top predators, but really we're a fairly inclusive group. And so if you're working on an iconic species that the community might love, welcome to CLIOTOP. And so things like squids and mesopelagic fish also get a rub, and even turtles, which you might imagine are not really a top predator, but they do fit this iconic species category. the kind of examples of how these species are responding to climate change is illustrated in this study of albacore tuna in the Bay of Biscay. And on the left-hand panel, it shows the arrival date to a fishing ground on the y-axis, and then years are on the x-axis, running from 1968 to 2004. And what you see is that the blue line is getting lower towards the right-hand side of the plot, which means that animals are arriving earlier. And on the other plot on the left-hand side, that shows latitude going up the y-axis, and that indicates that their species are also moving to more northerly locations. And that kind of pattern we're seeing around the world in many, many taxa. So the goal of the CLIOTOP program really has three branches. It's to compare what's going on around the world, it's to collect new information using new approaches, and it's to make predictions about what the implication of those changes will be for society and for the species. I'm going to give an example of each of those three categories just to give a flavour of what CLIOTOP has achieved over the last 10 years. We have a working group structure, and you heard about that previously in the meeting. I just wanted to kind of explain how this kind of regional program works. 10 years ago when it started and I became involved, I had not much idea how these working groups work and how these things work. And you can think of CLIOTOP and all the other regional programs that you heard about as having a set of objectives. A group of people get together and make up some statements that they'd like to see the world turn their attention to. You put those out there and you hope that that light illuminates some working group activities. If you throw a little bit of money at it, some things might happen, and all of those dots indicate kind of activities that happen under the formal umbrella of a program like CLIOTOP. Outside that very small money envelope, there's a range of other aligned efforts. If you're coming to this symposium and presenting work in this kind of area, that's what we call these aligned efforts, and that happens with your graduate students, with your colleagues, with your national research programs that don't receive any money. And then further away from that are efforts that are consistent with what we're interested in, and that's the research community at large. And it's really hard to know how much you influence that or whether those things would have happened anyway. But what I illustrate by that is that there's a really wide range of activity that kind of fits under the umbrella for CLIOTOP's regional program and for all of the other ones that we've heard about this week. The money in the middle, it's not great. And so the activities that are under that central spotlight really depend a lot on the goodwill and the enthusiasm of the community. And for me, that's what makes being a part of IMBeR and CLIOTOP such a fantastic thing. You develop networks and friendships and projects that you wouldn't have had if you weren't involved. But the money is small, and that's meant that not all scientists have wanted to be involved in CLIOTOP. Unfortunately, some people don't do it unless there's a whole lot of money in it. And Linda, despite our requests, has not been willing to join into CLIOTOP. But we have plenty of other nationalities and people who have been willing to be involved. But if you're in it for the money, it's probably not the game for you. As a first example then of what we're doing to compare across top predators, one of the working groups has assembled a database of stomach contents and isotope analysis from around the world, and that's involved more than 5 different countries pooling their samples together and being willing to undertake novel and new analyses. Isotope samples, more than 4,000. Stomach samples, more than 20,000. And that's let this group do the first inter-ocean comparison of top predator diets and ecosystem structure in those regions. And it's efforts like that you wouldn't get to do unless you're a part of CLIOTOP or IMBeR programs or so on. As an example of collecting new information with new approaches, members of working groups of CLIOTOPs have been involved in designing new sampling equipment. And this is an instrument that you tow behind a ship and gives you very high resolution imaging of larvae. And on the basis of that, for example, of the water flowing through it, you can do really effective image recognition of different types of species that lets you study things like patchiness, co-occurrence of species, and predator-prey relationships. And it's use of technologies like that that also really benefit a community. This is developed through a national research project, but it's been available as a result of wider efforts within our community. Similarly, we spend a lot of time in our community collecting information on the movements and migration of species. And this is just 3 examples for elephant seals. On the top left, Waddell seals and 4 other species in the Antarctic Peninsula region. And in Australia, where I work, information on bluefin tuna movements. And it's those massive migrations that really give us that emphasis that Claudio was talking about the connectedness of the ocean and how much we need to do this as a global community in terms of managing and protecting these species. And then the third element of CLIOTOP has been about making predictions. And in that sense, we've been really effective in going from end to end, in a sense of starting at the physics and moving all the way to the people. We've done it with things like predicting bluefin tuna spawning habitat in the Gulf of Mexico. And the way to look at this picture is those 4 months across the columns represent the spawning period, and for different times into the future going down there. And if you squint your eyes at that kind of figure, you see it pretty much is going from red and orange in the top down to blue in the bottom. And that indicates that the spawning habitat for this kind of animal will disappear from that region if these projections are correct. As another example, working with physical oceanographers, we're looking at what the projected rate of warming is in the Pacific Ocean. This is an illustration of the difference between the end of this century and the beginning of the century, and we're seeing these warming right through the Central Pacific, and that's going to have an impact on where fish are found. So by using an ecosystem-based model, you're able to project in these different regions of the ocean, and those different shadings on the top plot just represent different biogeographic divisions of the ocean. And then in the lower set of 4 plots, it just indicates how much the prey is going to change in those regions. In the cases where bars are below the line, then those groups of zooplankton and phytoplankton are going to get smaller. In other cases, they might improve in size. Because of those changes in the prey, though, it's the top predator distributions that will change. And in this second series of plots, the top left shows the distribution of skipjack spawning habitat in the early 2000s, and there's a projection by 2035 that shows that it's going to increase by 9% in the box to the right. What does that mean for different countries in those regions is illustrated by the set of plots on the right-hand side, which shows, if you just focus on the bottom right-hand one, it shows how much the biomass that's available to those countries for harvest will change over the next 35 years or so. They're arranged from going from west to east. So countries on the left-hand side of those blue bars will receive less tuna in their economic zone, and those to the right will receive more. So we all have winners and losers, and the governance of that resource then into the future will be important in resource sharing. So that's an example of going all the way from the projections of change in the ocean all the way through to what it may mean for the people. And so I think we've done some really great work, but where's this all taking us? You recognise this figure as the rate of carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere. And when I kind of became aware of this kind of figure was 1993. Put a regression line through that, and it's actually accelerated since I became involved in science. Plenty of you have been on that same part of the curve, so you've got to ask yourself, where's this effort taking us? We've seen no slowdown since the period of time that most of us became aware of it. So we can keep plugging away and doing the same thing, and that curve might keep going up. Or I think we've got to start to offer some solutions that accept the fact that that curve may not change. And that will be the thing that I'll talk about just for the remainder of my time. Well, what are we going to do instead? A lot of the focus of this community is about just documenting the impacts. And we've got a list as long as the IPCC report of 2,000 pages that shows what these impacts are around the world. And the problem is, I think we're delivering society bad news all the time. Before the 1980s, science was great for people. It brought you the microwave, it brought space travel, mind you, we didn't all do it, but it gave opportunity and excitement to the world. And technology, which science was firmly behind, was making people's lives better. If you think post-1980s, scientists don't bring us happy news anymore. They bring us problems and environmental issues. Tell us about the ozone hole, about DDT, about overfishing, about endangered species. And part of the reaction to that, I think we understand it now from psychology and social scientist work, is that people don't respond to that fear. They tend to put their heads in the sand. And maybe that's part of the problem, is that our effort continues to tell people what's wrong without offering solutions. So my pitch to you is I hope that in the remainder of the talk I'll show how can we start to get in there and provide solutions and give people a little bit of hope that we can do something. A lot of our work goes to mitigation, and that's really important, because if we don't manage the amount of greenhouse gases, we won't be able to avoid the unmanageable, and we're really in trouble. But there's this other area of research around adaptation, which is about the action we can do to manage the unavoidable. It's the thing that we're already committed to. The amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have already committed us to a certain amount of warming, and we're just going to have to live with that for at least the next 30 to 50 years. So again, I recommend this paper to you that came out in Nature Climate Change yesterday or the day before, about how can we enhance our impact in our messaging of our research to society. So if we take a look at what can adaptation do and how would we approach that as marine scientists, adaptation is about adjustment in systems, and it can be applied to the human part of the problem, or it can be applied to the species part of the problem. The challenge with adaptation is while you're trying to moderate these harmful effects, is that natural processes of adaptation are unlikely to be able to keep up with the rate of change that we're observing. We won't see a stop to mass extinction. We won't see reductions in poverty and in livelihoods. And so an alternative to autonomous adaptation, which is just hoping things will get better by taking your foot off the accelerator, is directed adaptation. Directed adaptation is about getting in and messing with the system. It is a bit like playing God, if you like. You're going to make decisions about where you intervene and where you put your money. But I think we have less alternative now than we might have had 40 years ago in terms of messing with systems. So my question is can directed adaptation help the group of species that CLIOTOP cares about? Can it help seabirds or marine mammals or tuna and billfish or those other iconic species? And what about the resource-dependent people? What adaptation is necessary to help those people better cope with the challenges that they are definitely going to face in the next 50 years? Adaptation thinking requires a new way of approaching a problem. It will be novel. Here was a paper in Science where high-profile scientists suggested that we would bring elephants to Australia to control a weed problem. You want to get published in Nature, right? You have to say something a bit outlandish. So you stretch you go right to the left. The other way to get published in Nature is to write your outrage letter about how bad the previous paper was and how it should be completely the other way. It generates controversy, but the challenge is we need to have new thinking. And if you're going to have novel conversations, you've got to have the maturity to have them. When people suggest these outlandish ideas, they're only outlandish the first time you hear them. And this community has the brain power and the networks and the approaches where some of these novel suggestions actually might play out. In Australia, we've tended to think about these novel solutions by looking at the places where intervention can work. And here's the standard IPCC vulnerability assessment diagram. And we use this as a way to generate thinking with stakeholders. You're vulnerable to climate change because you're exposed to an increase in temperature, your species or your human is sensitive to it. It has a potential impact that is offset by the adaptive capacity of that community or that species. If it's heavily fished, it will have less adaptive capacity. If the community is totally dependent upon seafood for their food, they will be more vulnerable than a group that is not. And you have options then in terms of management. If you can decrease the exposure of the species or community, if you can decrease their sensitivity, or if you can increase their adaptive capacity. And in conservation work, most of the effort has been increasing the adaptive capacity. We want to stop the other stresses, we want to make sure everything's got a nice fence around it, but we pay less attention to reducing the exposure or decreasing the sensitivity. So I'll give an example that we've worked on shortly with that. But for things like seabirds, marine mammals, there are a range of things that you can do to decrease exposure. You can move things to new locations. You can modify habitats. You can do engineering that makes that environment not express the same physical effect. You can reduce the sensitivity of species, supplemental feeding, habitat modification again, so that even though it's at 2 degrees hotter where the animal lives, it's not experiencing the same stress as a result of that temperature change. And then you can increase the adaptive capacity, and these are our traditional interventions, reducing bycatch, managing pests, and reducing other stresses. But we don't spend nearly enough time thinking about the top two options there. And they might be attractive to society because they're not telling them to stop doing something. Every time you go for the bottom right, that's generally asking society to stop doing something in the hope that it will have a positive benefit. So the example I'll give you is where we've worked with a conservation agency, a state agency in Tasmania to look at affecting change and getting them to think differently about how they might do conservation. So this is a species of albatross that's threatened. It's monitored. There's a government mandate about monitoring it and making sure that they know what's going on in the population. But that's all they do. So in recent years, when there's been this slight hint of a decline in the population, it offered an opportunity to say, what if that continued? What would you do differently in your management? Would you just continue going out there every year and counting the birds as they decline? And by working with one of the managers, we kind of convinced them that no, maybe we don't want to do that. What could we do? It's not a crisis, so we don't have to get it right the first time. In this case, it has a really clear environmental pattern. The figure on the right shows the breeding success of those birds as a function of hot days, and it generally decreases as the days get warmer. As we have more warm days. So there's a clear environmental pattern, and also we've been able to put together the story that shows that the future environment will be warmer. And the right-hand side shows the projected pattern of warming out to the year 2090. The red shows the current historical pattern in that region. And so for the managers, we've been able to tell them, your bird's going down, We know what the one environmental relationship is, and the future's not going to get any better. We have a full population model for this species, and we ran it with a whole bunch of combinations that include turning off fishing, removing predators, sorry, not removing, but turning off fishing, making the environment extremely productive. And in each one of those scenarios that are indicated here, there are none of them that really, that end up with the same population, that horizontal line in future as you have today. So every one of those population scenarios says that we'll have less birds in future. So you've got to do something different if you want to maintain this particular example species. So with the management agency, we got together and we brainstormed and we came up with about 20 adaptation options. And we evaluate them with a tool that we call a simple cost-benefit risk tool. And on the lower axis is the relative cost of the intervention. On the y-axis is the expected benefit of that intervention. Really simple to do, and it's really empowering to stakeholders to try brainstorming, because we came up with 20 odd options that we might do for this albatross species. You can score these things, and as a scientist, we love to do scoring and ranking. And what it really shows you is that there are a group of activities that you might do which are high cost and won't provide much benefit to this species. So let's put those on the back burner for now. There's a group of things that are low cost and might be quite high benefit. Those are the things we should have a crack at practicing. See if they will work and provide evidence that you can intervene and save a species trajectory. Not surprisingly, the majority of things, if they don't cost very much, you don't get much benefit. If they cost a lot, you get more. That's the rub of doing this kind of work. So with this agency then, we've identified one of the activities in the top right there and have been able to go out and test it. And this has all happened in the course of about 18 months, from identifying a problem to going through and testing it. But what we do, we're going to enhance chick survival. When we get warmer temperatures, they will have more of a parasite load. So could we get in there and reduce that ectoparasite load and lead to increased survival of this species? Get out there on the island, go through all of your ethics approvals and everything like that, and spray a bunch of chicks. We treated about 100 chicks in each of 2 plots, and the test was, would it increase the survival? In fact, when we sprayed these birds, in the actual minutes after spraying them, I don't know if you can see the black dots coming out on the feet of that chick, but the parasites are just dropping off the birds. They have very heavy parasite load. And if this disease treatment is effective, would that increase their survival? And just in March this year, we went back at these 2 sites after 6 weeks after doing this initial treatment, and we had about a 10% effect. So it was an example of a strategy where you went in with a conservation agency, diddled with the birds, and had a positive conservation outcome. Now, whether this is going to save the world or this particular species, who knows? But it was really about changing attitudes of the conservation agency. Instead of putting a fence around and keeping everybody out, they've taken a different attitude about how will we need to get in there with our fingers and twiddle the dials. There may be many more examples and ways of doing this, and the more of these examples you can gather, the more that our managers and policymakers will perhaps consider this alternative. And this kind of intervention really fits within what we call adaptive management. And as you develop these approaches, you'll continue to cycle through and try them and see what works. And we've got a period of time when we can be somewhat experimental in trying these before things really hit the crisis point for species. It's pretty easy to do with birds, right? They sit on rocks, we can go out and get them. They're a pelagic species, sure, so they fit under our CLIOTOP umbrella. But when we can get to them, they're sitting on rocks. It's going to be much harder for things like tuna. Here are some schools in the Great Australia Bight. What intervention strategy are we going to do with open water species like this? But how long have we been thinking about it? It might be that things like reducing exposure are quite hard. Maybe the reducing sensitivity is an option. Could we do genetic modification? Could you introduce different prey species? What might work? Definitely we know the adaptive capacity options will be out there and exist, and we can continue to do those effectively. So my thought though is that we need to put some effort into it. Have you ever seen one of these plots where the number of publications didn't go up in time? What if we're right at the start of this now in terms of how we're going to do a better job of managing species and ecosystems with things like interventions? If we can recruit all the graduate students in the world, maybe this is how this plot goes up. Every scientist stampedes to this topic, like they have for ocean acidification. What would be the brain power that you would bring to this kind of problem? I think it would be a really impressive effort. That's a species example, and I'll just finish now with the idea that that's just the species part of our oceanic systems, and there are humans that depend on them as well. And sometimes it's a tough ask to get to people and get them to think about how they're going to change their behaviours. In Australia, we have really bad droughts, and after a drought is finished, the reporters go into that place and they say, oh, you've just suffered a really bad drought, what's your plan? And the Australian says, oh, I'll be right back there next year doing exactly the same thing, you know, I'm a fighter. And we reward that. We think that's a great attitude, good on you, mate. But why aren't we saying, why are you going back there? Aren't you going to move somewhere else? Aren't you going to do something differently? And we tend to reward people for coming back and building their house in the same place after a flood. You know, the sea level storm has just washed away your house. What are you going to do? I'm going to get right back there and rebuild. Yeah, good on you. So we have to, people think they're resilient. They want to adapt to these changes. But they're equally vulnerable. And the challenge has been to kind of illustrate how the ecological vulnerability and the social vulnerability are really linked. And so I've just given you an example of the top left, where for species we can look at reducing the exposure or sensitivity and adaptive capacity. And for human systems that are also dependent upon natural systems, they also have exposure, sensitivity and adaptive capacity. And those things are very much interlinked. And it's the vulnerability because of the change in the natural system that then flows through to that human system. And so in the same way as we generated adaptation options at the species end of the spectrum, humans have particular vulnerabilities as well. And you can target interventions or adaptation options in any one of those places in your social ecological system. And so our challenge is to, again, work with communities and think about the options that you can play at each one of those places that will make the future less challenging. And so in the case of the human system, the adaptation options in terms of why are they sensitive to those ecological changes are because that's the only species they catch, or it's the only job they've got, or it's their only way, it's where they live. So you can reduce their dependence on something by thinking of adaptation strategies. You can increase their adaptive capacity, and a lot of social research is going in and looking at how do we increase the adaptive capacity of communities. But again, this kind of linked socio-ecological model makes it really easy to work with stakeholders and think of options that they might try or experiment with. We study things, but we're also a part of that system as well, and we've got to adapt as well. Unfortunately, our career progression is pretty much like when you're an early career scientist, you study impacts. You keep adding to the pile of the things that are going to be wrong with the world. Then, you know, kind of where I am, you start wondering about the attribution question. Well, why? You know, what's responsible to that? And when you get a bit more grey hair, you start thinking, what am I going to do about it? And the adaptation problems. People get into policy and governance. They've only got a few years left. Why aren't we getting them into it earlier and trying to do these things a little bit earlier? So my challenge to you is, how do we speed this up? And I think we can speed it up by rethinking what kind of scientists will be useful under climate change. Here's scientist number one, and on the x-axis is the time that he's spent in his career, or the time that she has spent working in that study system. And we tend to, when we approach something new, we're very linear. We get a handle on the impacts, we then move to the attribution, and then we start thinking about adaptation. We don't have time for the next generation of scientists to go through that same progression. And even if you're in it now in a new study system, we don't have time for you to get to the end before we start thinking about solving the problem. So I'd say that this is the model that we ought to be encouraging now for you know, tackling these kind of problems. Before you've got a handle on the impacts, before you've even attributed everything that's going on, start thinking about what the options are and the adaptations that you can be employing. It's a harder space because you have to operate with uncertainty. The people who are stuck in the model on the left will tell you, you can't say that, you don't know enough about it. But we can't spend the next 20 years studying every species and every ecosystem and getting it all right before we move to the adaptation and the attribution. We've got to start getting in and trying and experimenting before things get to a crisis point. And that is going to be challenging in the ocean, but let's put our brains to it. Wrapping up. We're already seeing lots of ocean changes. It's already happening. This is not a problem that's coming to society in the next 20 or 50 years. And the more that we can emphasise that it's here now, I think we can bring the immediacy of that. You've got three options as a researcher in this area. You can keep documenting the change. You're on the sinking ship. Just keep studying away and report to people how things are going wrong. If we're effective, we can change the trajectory of warming via our policy interventions. And the third option that we've got, which I'm advocating more of, is that we can help species and people and systems to adapt. We can't wait for scientific certainty to start playing and changing around with things. With regard to the pelagic predators, which I'm involved in, options do exist for climate change for pelagic top predators. It's going to be hard, but we haven't really started thinking about it yet. And so I think there are going to be more clever people, not at this meeting, still being educated, working in other countries, that will think of problem-solving approaches that we haven't even considered. The way to start doing that from my line of work is to get involved with willing managers. These people willing to take a punt in the system that they're in charge of. If you don't find a responsive ally, move quickly to someone else. Don't keep banging your head against with the same group. Be flexible. And particularly ask them what decisions are they confronting at the moment that you can kind of get involved and get a trust partnership going such that you're able to try these experiments that we're proposing here. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Alistair. We have time for some questions for coffee. Steven Hassel.
I'm sorry, I can continue a little bit my thinking before. For the politicians, when you are going to work, to talk to them, they are all also with gray hair. So it's too late. They were living and educating in another world. So it's too late. So I don't think it's useful to talk to these people. I think it's more useful to educate children to love nature, not to be aware of the with our species and extinction and all these things, not to love nature. If we can educate children to love nature, I think we will have a lot of work done. So in my perspective, I was proposing that we can use a little part of our time to teach how to teach schools, to teach children to love nature.
I think there's nothing wrong with the sentiment of bringing it to children, but they're going to be 25 years before they're decision makers. So we're going to wait 25 years with that strategy of educating children. I think now, politicians, if they've got grey hair, they're too old, but middle managers who have got a clear task that they're charged with are doing those decisions now. Don't go to the top's too scared to try anything. Get involved with people in the middle who are twiddling dials and willing to have a go. Put your grad students into government policy departments, put your grad students into management positions, then you've got a bit of a hook and a lever, you can exert that pressure to come and continue working with you. But I think we need strategies we can start now, and that means working with the people in those positions.
I'm not sure that graduate students would thank me for putting them into policy positions too early. Further questions? More questions? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm a PhD student at UNIS and Tucson, and I think it's really nice to hear. I'm married to a civil engineer, and we very often sit at home and discuss, and every day he shows me he's working with energy economization. There's a lot of things that can be done as long as you convince people a bit further up, or just a tiny bit further up, that it's useful. And it's the way we do it. I said it yesterday in the session that we had, and I had the feeling I was a bit silent, but I think really if we manage to get across, there are, as you said, that there are possibilities. It's not just, no, don't go this way. It's horrible, but say, well, this way is bad, but there is another way. It might be a bit steep, but it has beautiful scenery. That's the way to go forward. And I think that, yeah, thanks for the talk. I think it was really a really good thing. And we are also the young ones. I think we want to make change and we want to think about solutions.
Yeah.
So it's really, really important.
Thank you. Think of the challenge of how many seabird species are endangered. 380 or so species. There are 380 people at this conference. If every one of you went and worked on that particular group and tried to work with a manager, maybe our bird problems would be solved. Multiply that by the number of scientists, and that's how you get that exponential curve of effort.
Other questions? Mike Elliott?
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Alistair. Great talk. Can I think yesterday we had the food, today we're going to have the music. Can I raise about the objective, where do we want to go? There's a line in the George Harrison song that says, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And I think all the stakeholders we talk to are confused about where we want to go. We talk to fishermen, what do you want? All your poor fish, industry, one more industry, conservation, one more conservation. And so what we're doing is we're confusing our audience. I mean, here we're preaching to the converted, but it's talk to the real world outside. And the message isn't getting through. And you say, well, why is the message not getting through? Is it because our objectives are not clear? You know, we talk about smart objectives, or realistic, funny. Is it just our objectives are not clear, so we're not reaching them? Or is it we're giving people unrealistic objectives? You know, how many objectives have we had? How many targets have we had that we've missed? So society then starts saying, oh, well, you told us we could go for this objective, but we've missed it. So was the science wrong, or we wrong? So I think we're missing that. It's the, I think what Claudio was saying earlier about the pragmatic parts. You know, are we doing the right objectives? Are we clear where we want to go? Because as I say, if we're not clear where we want to go, then we've no idea when we reach there.
Yeah, I think the worst kind of objectives are just where you set one in the distance and then you step back and hope that you'll get there someday. I think it's really important to develop what we call an adaptation pathway, which says, you know, we've got some trajectory or, sorry, some point we want to be in the future. How would we actually get there? And what are the choices that we can make to get there? I think if you can lay out to groups of people that are concerned about that particular issue, the pathway they would have to follow to get there, and what are the actual action steps to take along the way, I think it becomes much more tractable. I think there's a real feeling in society that the problem is too hard. We're not going to solve it. There's no individual action I can do or anything. It's just too hard. And I think our challenge should be, let's not keep doing let's balance the impact studies that keep telling us how bad it is with studies that provide options. I think the more we can pile those options up, the less the policy or manager can say, but there's no way to do it. Show me where that would work. We can start showing where it works.
Is there one final question? Okay.
Add a comment. I'll add a comment, and I would say that we are not doing it well also because we are not inspiring. It's not that we don't have a clear idea of what we want to convey, and I'm not sure that we are proposing things that are so difficult that people are saying, no, it's too much. We are not inspiring. Society is not being inspired by what we are telling them. So the values are not there to really have the energy to do it. That could be also an explanation.
Thank you very much again, Alistair. Thank you.